Hi, this is Kathy from GadgetStop321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Robert Oster, River of Fire. I'll be doing a writing sample on 52 GSM Tomoe River paper using a variety of pens and nib sizes. I'll take a look at some writing samples that I did earlier on a variety of other types of paper. I'll compare Robert Oster River of Fire to similar inks from my collection. And finally, I'll take a look at the results of my water resistance test. I enjoyed writing with River of Fire using my glass dip pen. The ink came off the nib fairly uniformly. Came off a little bit heavier here at the beginning, but as far as a glass dip nib goes, it was pretty smooth. The swatch that I made with my tweezers ranged from a very dark, almost black green to a kind of a medium forest green. The drip at the end of the swatch has just a little bit of pink sheen, a tiny halo of pink sheen. I'm going to begin my writing sample with a Pilot Cacuno. It has an extra fine stainless steel nib. Considering that this is an extra fine nib, it's very smooth. Very enjoyable to write with on this smooth Tomoe River paper. Next, I've got a Pilot Explorer. It has a fine stainless steel nib. Again, very smooth for a fine nib. Next, I've got a Caveco Perchao. It has a medium stainless steel nib. This nib feels kind of chalky on this, even though this paper is pretty smooth, but it feels very nice. And I've mentioned this before. I guess it more so sounds chalky than feeling chalky. It feels pretty smooth, but you can really hear the feedback on the paper. Next, I've got a Pilot Metropolitan. It has a stainless steel calligraphy medium nib. A little bit of a hard start there. This ink is still nice and dark. I'm getting more of the dark end of the spectrum, even though this nib is a bit drier, and it's very smooth. Next, I've got a Caveco AL Sport in the golden espresso finish. It has a stainless steel broad nib. Very smooth. And out of all of the nibs that I've done writing samples with this ink, this one is the only one that I would use for any type of reverse writing. So I'll go ahead and show that. Not all of my Caveco nibs are good reverse writers. This broad nib is. The double broad is a little too dry and was too scratchy. My medium nib is really good, and I think the gold fine nib I have is pretty good. Next, I've got a Jinhao X750. It has a 1.5 stainless steel stub nib. Very smooth and enjoyable. While that dries, I'll take a look at some of the other writing samples. The writing sample that I did on Rhodia paper was very enjoyable. The shading ranged from, again, really dark to that medium green color. I was expecting to see some sheen possibly on this paper, but there's not really any sheen. My Caveco was a little bit blobby, and I discovered that I had a paper fiber in the nib, so it was causing the ink to kind of spread and blob, but I was able to just pull that little fiber out with my fingers. Everything was very enjoyable to write with. The extra fine had some noticeable feedback, but it was still very nice. This is where I was testing the reverse writing in the Caveco Perchao. It just wouldn't reverse write at all. It was too dry. The Pilot Explorer and the Pilot Cacuno were scratchy and unpleasant, but I feel like if I really wanted to use those for reverse writing, I could do just a tiny bit of work with some micro mesh, and it would be very nice because the ink delivery was very uniform. I think my favorite two pens, really, I don't think I had a favorite. It just depends on what application you're going to be using, whether you want a fine or a really wide stub nib. On this paper, I didn't have a favorite because they were all so good. On the copy paper, everything was really nice. I didn't really, well, maybe there is just a little bit of feathering with the wetter nibs. But the feathering I guess I would call that more spread. The ink spreads in all directions. You don't have a whole lot of like little wild feathers. Again, everything was very nice, but I did have some favorites. I put a heart beside the wrong one up here. It should have been the Pilot Metropolitan because it's a drier writer, but still very pleasant and looks good. And since it's a drier writer, it doesn't bleed through the paper at all, where the others would bleed through, little dots here and there. But the Metropolitan didn't bleed through at all. And the two finer nibs didn't bleed through as much as the wider nibs. You would have a little dot here and there, but they were still very smooth considering how fine they are. It does put down, the line it puts down on this copy paper looks a little bit wider than it does on the more fountain pen friendly papers because like I mentioned up here, the ink does seem to be spreading a little bit, but it's not unpleasant. Usually I don't like it when you can feel that ink spread, but this was just so smooth. A nice ink to use on poor quality paper. In my old Leuchtturm bullet journal, I got a little bit of sheen, and I don't know if it's going to show up. I've got sheen and shading. It's late in the evening and my light is not the best, but on some of these letters you can see maybe the shading, and on the darker part of the letter there's a halo of that pink sheen that's just barely visible, but just enough that it makes the writing interesting. I only had two other inks that were similar to Robert Oster River of Fire. Lamy Peridot was very similar. Monteverde California Teal is similar, but a little bit brighter. In the wet writing sample, they look even more similar, but I feel like in a stub nib, California Teal is going to look a bit brighter. And it looks like it's looking a bit more of the blue is showing up in my viewfinder. This looks a little more green in real life. And so I guess I need to show, let's see, I've got palm green here to show that when I compare this to a true green, you do see a bit more of the blue. But as I'm looking at it here, both of these are looking more green. Let me grab an actual more turquoisey, more blue ink, and if I compare it to that, you can see it does look a little bit more green, more like it does here me looking at it at real life. I was expecting this ink to be more of a sheener. I don't know why I was thinking that. So I had gotten it out and compared it to Organic Studio Aldous Huxley, but now you can see those do look more green compared to that teal ink. And for my water resistance test, I do a writing sample on rhodia paper, then submerge it in water for 10 minutes. And you can see there's a little bit of ink left behind, but Robert Oster River of Fire is not water resistant. Surprisingly, though, when I did submerge it in water, the ink that came off looked a lot more blue than it looks on the paper. It looked very turquoise. And if you want to see how I do my water resistance test and how the ink looks when it's submerged in water, you can go over to my Instagram, GadgetStop321, and you can see several of the most recent inks that I've tested. And finally, on Tomoe River paper, no bleed through even on the heaviest applications, but quite a bit of show through because this is a fairly dark ink. In my poor lighting, this isn't going to show up, but I'm seeing quite a bit of shading and sheen on the Pilot Metropolitan, a little bit of shading and sheen on the Caveco Perchao. Surprisingly, the Caveco Broad, I'm not seeing very much shading and sheening. I guess it's on par with the Caveco Perchao. And there's shading and sheeting on this stub nib that looks very nice. On the fine nibs, it's just a nice, uniform, solid green-black. I really like it. Actually, this looks, I guess to my eye in this lighting, this looks like a Christmas tree green. I was thinking as I was writing with this would be a nice ink to use around Christmas time for Christmas cards. It's a darker ink. I think it looks like something I would prefer using in fall or winter. Alright, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.